Let us talk about the Christmas time massacre you have never heard of. In the winter of 1643, Lord Byron, the leading royalist commander in Cheshire, was bolstered by troops coming over from Ireland. With his position now much stronger, he began tasking his men with riding out and attacking small parliamentarian contingents that had quartered themselves in villages and towns across Cheshire. One of these groups was led by Major John Connaught, a cavalry officer in command of the Staffordshire Horse. On the 23rd of December 1643, Connaught arrived at the small Cheshire village of Barthomley, where a small group of 20 parliamentarian supporters had taken shelter inside of the local church. A fight broke out between these two groups. The cause of the fight is somewhat unclear, as later on both sides would claim that the other side had provoked them into the fight. But regardless of how the fight began, the outcome was the same. The royalist troops forced their way into the church of Barthomley, and they managed to drive out the parliamentarians using fire and smoke. When the parliamentarians fled the church and surrendered, they found themselves stripped of their possessions, their clothing, and many of them had their throats cut. By the end of the day, about 12 pro-parliamentarian villagers and militiamen were killed, alongside with one royalist trooper. It is interesting to note that 4 of the pro-parliamentarians that were killed also happened to be relatives of Colonel Thomas Steele, the parliamentarian governor of Beeston Castle. The royalist troopers stayed and looted Barthomley until after Christmas Day, when they departed the village and made their way off to their next location. This incident was heavily publicised by the parliamentarians, who wanted to emphasise the idea that the royalists were committing war crimes against innocent civilians. In fact, it was so notorious that the parliamentarians intended to bring up the massacre at Barthomley during the trial of King Charles I. But because King Charles I had refused to plead guilty, acknowledge the court, or even just defend his own position, the prosecution never really had to put forward a case, and so the massacre at Barthomley was never mentioned in court. Even though it wasn't brought up during the trial of King Charles I, it did get brought up in another court case. 11 years after the Barthomley massacre, a certain ex-Major John Connaught was tried at the Chester Assize Court for murders that he had committed at Barthomley. He was found guilty and he was sentenced to death, and he was hanged at Broughton in October 1654.